Akiptan is a native CDFI, a Native Community Development Financial Institution. And what that means is that we are a nonprofit lender. We are based in Eagle Butte, South Dakota on the Cheyenne River Res, but we do serve nationwide all across Indian country. And the difference between like us and a typical Native CDFI is that we only finance Native Americans in agriculture. Most CDFIs will do agriculture, small business, housing, credit building, consumer loans, all the things. We specifically focus just on the agriculture industry, and that's because of where we came from. So Akiptan was born from the decades-old company, the Intertribal Agriculture Council. I see they do a lot of things, but one of their their overarching mission is to connect Native producers with the resources that they need to succeed. And oftentimes one of those resources is financing. And finding fair financing and credit that worked in Indian country was really hard. And so finally they said, you know what, we're going to bridge this gap ourselves. We're going to create our own native CDFI to serve Native producers and to serve them correctly, to practice patient capital, to be a good lender, to be a good partner with them in this business. So that's where I came into play. And we opened up for lending in January 2019. We took about a year working with our board and going to conferences and trainings and learning and figuring out how we can make this we can do this lending in an indigenous kind of way, how we can work together with our borrowers, how we can do things better, what can we steal and modify, and all the things, right? And so we opened up for lending in January 2019, and it has been quite the ride, but it's been very, very exciting. We're super, super fortunate to get to have the footprint that we do. We have lent on 19 different tribal nations. We've lent a little over $5 million in total, which is really exciting. And I'll just give a brief overview of our services. We recently increased our loan limits for our general loan, which can be used for operating, a line of credit, for ownership, to $250,000 for adults. We also have a youth product that is up to $5,000 for a youth ag operation. But our most exciting is that we've increased our limits for our general loan, and you can do our traditional repayment style or our investment repayment style. With that $250,000, and the investment repayment style is the one where we've got up to 5 years interest only payments, and we've got a different webinar and some reading material on our website if you wanted to read more about that, or you can reach out and we're happy to visit more about that and those repayment styles and how that works with you. We have our recently passed, as of Monday morning, land mortgage product, and we can also use that for down payment assistance. So that is very exciting that we now have a land mortgage product that we can use to address ownership issues, highly fractionated land, and all the things. So we're really excited about that. But what makes us Native CDFIs and CDFIs in general unique to traditional lenders is the technical assistance component that comes with our financing that you typically don't get at banks. So we provide a lot of technical assistance for our producers. We help with them to understand their operations finances, for goal planning, to and like financial literacy training so that they understand loan agreements, security agreements, and all the things. So we also take time and pair our lending with technical assistance to really give our borrowers a well-rounded grasp about what all of this is. And now we can get into what we all came here to learn and talk about and discuss. So we're going to start this off with the poll. Dawn, let me know if you're having troubles putting the poll out there. But balance sheets. So we all hear the terms, we all hear the words. And And how do you feel about your balance sheets? 0, you need some guidance, or are you feeling like a 10, like, hey, I could teach this class, lady, give me the mic. And just give it a brief moment to answer that. All right. Okay. I think I'm gonna end the poll now. Looking like we can cover all the information. So super excited about that. We had a lot of our participants just say that they were just needing the guidance side. So I'm super excited to be able to help with that. So the purpose of a balance sheet is to show what an operation owes and owns. So what you what you own is an asset, and what you owe is a liability. And the difference between that is your equity in your operation. And equity means the part that's like free and clear, that the bank doesn't own, that's all paid off. There's no liens on it, anything like that. So there's different parts of a balance sheet. So we have an asset schedule, and that is a list of everything that you own. So that includes like your livestock, equipment, machinery, land, infrastructure, your tools, all of those things. That's what you would list on your asset side. And then on your liabilities side, you would list all of your debt, all of your notes. So if you have an operating note, if you've got a note or a loan for your cows, if you have a loan for the building that you're operating in, or like any farm vehicles, like any notes that you would have. And then you have a summary page. And I've got some examples that I'll show here in a little bit. But so then you've got your summary page. So you group your assets into different groups, your assets and your liabilities into current, intermediate, and long-term. And when we talk about current assets, that's things that have like a lifespan of 1 year, that in 1 year they're not going to be there anymore. So like one example is hay bales. You feed those in the summer, they're not around for longer than a year. So those are a current asset. And then you move on to your intermediate assets that have a lifespan of like 1 to 10 years on average. And that's typically like most of like your machinery and equipment, like if you have panels, if you have equipment that you use in your operation for like value added and different things like that. So that's what we call your intermediate assets. And then your long-term assets are anything that have a lifespan of over 10 years. So that would be your like real estate and your infrastructure. So like a barn, your processing facility, the land it's on, those kinds of things. And when we put your liabilities into those 3 categories, it follows the same rules as like 1 year, 1 to 10 years, and 10 plus years. So anything that's due within 12 months is a current liability. Anything that's due between 1 to 10 years is an intermediate liability, and anything longer than 10 years is a long-term liability. So different things. So like your operating note, that is a current liability because that's due in a year typically. A land mortgage, if you get 30 years on that, that's a long-term note. Tractors, if you get like a 7-year note on that, that would be an intermediate debt. And it kind of just depends on how that is all structured. And so I am going to get out of this and show you a couple examples. So one example that we have put together is for a rancher. And so here is this beginning rancher, just a brief summary. Rancher Joe here, he has just received a loan with Akiptan, and this is all hypothetical, but he just received a loan with Akiptan and is a new and beginning farmer and rancher. His dad is going to help him with some operating expenses for the first couple of years in exchange for labor. And then in year 3, he's going to be responsible for all of his operating expenses. And he already owns like a few assets, but we helped him buy some cows. And so he has a cattle note with us and an operating note with us. And so I'll just go over some of what his financial statements would look like. So on his asset schedule, there's different categories within that. So there's cash and cash equivalents. So in his ranch account, he's got $500 operating to start him out with right now. He has a few hay bales that we put on here. And when you put things on an asset schedule, you need to have what they are, how many of them. If you can get a year, that's great. And then the value of that, so you can calculate the total value over here. So we've got his hay bales, and that is the current asset because they'll all be fed up in a year. They won't be around in a year. And then we go on to market livestock. So he has pairs right now. And so he has 76 calves on the ground. So since he is selling those in the fall and they won't be around in a year, that is considered a current asset. However, if you look down here and see like in the raised breeding stock where he has 75 heifers and then he has 5 older cows, those are considered an intermediate asset because he keeps them around for longer than 1 year. And yes, we understand that like when you have your opens and things like that, but then they get transferred into a different section when you figure them that way. But right now it's middle of summer. He doesn't know what he has open. So they're all just considered intermediate assets. So his calves are current assets because we're selling them in a year, and then his raised breeding stock is intermediate. Machinery and equipment is also intermediate because those last longer than a year. And since this guy's a new and beginning farmer and rancher, he does not have any infrastructure or real estate that he owns. He has a little bit of off-farm assets that we also include. So so he works a little bit off the farm, just helping neighbors brand calves, and he breaks a couple horses and things like that, and that's his off-farm stuff. So in that bank account, he's got like $1,200, and then he has a Ram pickup, and so we put that on here as well. On the flip side, on his liabilities side, we have included our operating note with him, and then the note for the cattle, annual payments. You have to know the interest rate for these things, and then the due date when it's due so that you can calculate how that looks afterwards. This personal note is for his pickup. So even though he still owes money on his pickup and on his cows, you put that down as the asset. You list that on the asset side, and you also list a note on the liability side. So if you can see here, his pickup was worth $40,000, but he has a note of a remaining balance of $32,000. So then there's a difference there, and it ends up evening out, but you have to list it on both sides. Even if you don't fully own it yet, even if there's still a lien on it and it's still financed, you still list it because it'll even out. And it comes into play when you go to your summary page and you can see your equity. So since I was just talking about his pickup, for the intermediate assets, he's got his pickup on there, and it is for $40,000. And then his personal current liabilities and intermediate liabilities, here's this. So for his off-farm equity, he has about like $5,000 of equity with his off-farm stuff, which is really good. So he is in the positive there. So then if we look up here quickly on the summary for like his on-farm, his ranch farm stuff, his total farm assets are $212,000 and his total farm liabilities are $162,000. So he's positive there. So his total equity, what he has free and clear, is $55,000, which is really good, especially for a new and beginning farmer and rancher. If we go to our farmer financials, it'll be pretty similar. So this Farmer Joe has a vegetable farm, and he has been growing and selling produce and is wanting to expand his business. So he is applying for a loan with Akiptan, and we're getting his financials all squared away. He's been dabbling in the value added market, but he wants to expand that. So he is applying for a loan to buy a greenhouse and then a vacuum sealing machine because currently he's renting one and he wants to get rid of that expense. So that's what we're doing. He wants to get some equity within that. So on his asset schedule, his looks a little bit different because he's more established, so he has more things. So he currently has 500 pounds of vegetables he still has to sell because those won't be around in a year. Because those won't be around in a year, those are considered current assets. And then here's an average dollar value of that inventory. One thing that is different on here than on the rancher financials was this guy has some prepaid expenses. So he has some current blank packaging. That's the value of that. He's prepaid his insurance and he has prepaid the rent for his vacuum sealing machine for the year. So we put that on there. He's got some more machinery and equipment. And then that is also a intermediate asset. He's got some farm vehicles. And then this guy has some real estate and infrastructure. So that's a long-term asset. We put that on there with the value. He's got 10 acres at $1,000 an acre. That comes out to 10,000. And then we included his off-farm stuff, his off-farm assets, and then we move over to the liability side. Currently, this farmer, the only on-farm note that he has is for his tractor that he uses. The balance of that is $8,000. He makes $3,000 annual payments at 6%, and then he has some personal debt. So then we bring that all together, and we include that over here on the summary page. And this is just your snapshot of the whole thing. And excuse me. And so we total up his current assets, total up intermediate assets, long-term, and then so his total farm assets are almost $89,000. And then the total farm liabilities currently without what he's applied for yet, because this is a balance sheet is a snapshot of that day in time. And they currently don't have a loan with Akiptan yet. So it's not included on there. This could change tomorrow. So tomorrow he might sell 30 pounds of vegetables. So that would decrease his current assets, the crop inventory part, but it would increase the cash and equivalents because that profit would go into his bank account. So the balance sheet can change day to day because it's a snapshot of that current moment in time. So then we go through and summarize everything, and his total equity on farm and off farm is almost $200,000. So that is really, really good and really, really healthy. So that is just a brief snapshot of the balance sheet. So now let's get into the cash flow. So on the cash flow side, the cash flow is all the inflows and outflows, all your income and expenses. It's the money side of what you're doing, the money you're making and the money that you're spending. And it helps to identify all like your ability to pay all your debts and all your bills. You want a positive cash flow because if it's a negative cash flow, you can't pay all your bills. So there's different components, just like there is on the balance sheet. And so you've got your on-farm expenses and you got your off-farm expenses, just like you had on-farm assets and off-farm assets and liabilities and stuff. It's the same things. So what is included in your on-farm income and expenses is your calf sales, your crop sales, custom hire income. So that's like, say, for example, you have a bunch of tractors and your neighbor hires you to go hay his field for him. That would be considered custom hire income. Any ag program payments you might get from USDA. Those are some of the examples of incomes that we see. And then as far as expenses, that's like fuel, feed, seed, other supplies, vaccine, vet bills, taxes, insurance, and salaries and wages and all of that stuff. It's everything you're spending money on. And then it's the same for the off-farm. We do simplify with off-farm. It's just typically like if you have a job in town, it's any money you're making that's not related to the ranch, and then your living expenses. So when you're paying your TV bill or groceries or different things like that, any off-farm debt payments, for like your daily driver that you take to your job in town if you have one, or just different things like that. So that's a quick overview of the cash flow. And one second. And so I have a couple examples. And so your cash flow is a little bit different than your balance sheet when it comes to like dates and times. Oh, we have a poll. I am so sorry. Dawn is going to send a poll and we're just gonna ask the same question. Like, how do you feel about your cash flow sheets? Are you feeling more of like a 0, like I don't quite understand them and I need more information, or like a 10, like, yep, I get this, I could teach this one too? And so I'll give a couple minutes for that. Okay, so it looks like we are a little bit mixed, and that is totally fine. So a few of us are feeling like I don't quite understand them, and a few of them are like, yep, I definitely got this. So we're going to review the whole thing in the entirety. So like I was saying, the cash flow in the time period is a little bit different than what you would see with the balance sheet. So the balance sheet, like I said, is like one day in time. So you put 10/27, 2021, and it's what your operation looks like that day. A cash flow, depending on your operation, can vary. So you can do a cash flow for all of 2021. You can do it for just October 2021. You can do it for just this week. It honestly depends on what fits your operation. Since most agriculture operations run on an annual cycle, you see most cash flows on an annual cycle. But for the ones that have like monthly cycles, let's say, for example, like your local co-ops that sell like the feed and seed and the supplies, they can do annual cash flows too, but they might do a lot of monthly cash flows too to see what that looks like, because they're making money and spending money monthly. So that their production cycles are just a little bit different. But with most agriculture operations, you do see annual ones. So, and that's what we're looking at here. You can kind of tell by the title up here, this is for 2021. So this is the farmer cash flow example. So you've got your on-farm income and expenses. So that's just what we're looking at right now, is the on-farm income and expenses. So in 2021, we're projecting that by year end, they're going to have $40,000 of sales from what they have grown and what in their value added line. And then other income, this person teaches a few farming classes in local communities throughout the year. So that's where that other income comes from. And then the operating expenses, it's all the things that they'll spend money on for the year. Different conservation practices are going to cost them $1,000, like their soil testing, different things like that. And then gas and fuel, because they have to go and get supplies and then take their products to market, different things like that. Insurance, labor hired. Sometimes during planting and harvesting season, they need help with their labor, so they hire labor. The equipment rent, so they have equipment rent this first year, because if you can remember, that's part of the loan that they're applying for with Akiptan, is for a vacuum sealing machine. And then the next years they won't have that expense anymore because they will own it. And we're talking on this schedule, we're doing just your operating expenses. We're not including debt payments on this schedule right now. We'll get to that in a second. And then they've got repairs and maintenance, because of course things break down, things break, and then all their seeds and fertilizers and different supplies, meaning just like shovels and if they need like new garden hoses, just things like that that they need. And as their operation grows, because you can see here each year it's growing, of course, the expenses are going up. They're going to need more seeds if they've got more things that they can plant and different things like that. So that is their on-farm income and expenses schedule. And we've got different projections over for the next 3 years, and that's what we're thinking it's going to look like. And that's what's going to help us determine what they can, as a lender, you look at that to see like, okay, like, can they support this loan that they're applying for? So then we look at their off-farm income and expenses. And one of the goals of this operation was to slowly quit working at their part-time job in town. So we can see over the net, we're being very conservative with this because it's better to be conservative than to shoot for the moon. So we are, as you can see here, we're gradually declining their off-farm income, but their living expenses are still staying the same. So that is reflective. And if you go to the cash flow summary page, it's where we tie it all together. You've got your on-farm income here, and then your off-farm income, and this is slowly declining because that was the goal, right? If we're making more money and spending more time at the farm, we should be making less money and spending less time off farm because we want, it's our goal to make this our main source of income. So then we tag in the operating expenses and we pull that from the on-farm income and expenses. And then this first year, they won't have a payment with Akiptan because we're just finishing up the loan now, but next year they will. And this is what their payment's going to be with what they've requested for the greenhouse and the vacuum sealing machine. They also have that $3,000 payment for their tractor at the bank. So here we got their total loan payments here, and then their total expenses. So that includes operating and all of their debt payments. So their cash on hand after farming, we should have changed that there, but their cash on hand after farming, because some of their on-farm income goes to pay their off-farm expenses. And that is totally fine, but it's something that we want to be sure that we're paying attention to when we're taking these things into consideration, because quality of life is just as important. So their cash on hand after farming, this is what we have. And then we add in their off-farm expenses. Each operation's different. Sometimes off-farm income cancels out off-farm expenses. They don't intertwine. Sometimes they do intertwine. Sometimes people don't have an off-farm job, so their on-farm income needs to cover everything. It just depends, and honestly, there's no right or wrong answer. But what we're looking for here is the ending cash on hand, and this is positive, and there is wiggle room, which is great. And so that is a really good, a healthy cash flow. And if we come over here to the rancher ones, a lot of it will be the same. So we've got your on-farm income and expenses. So his main income source is his calf sales. And then since this is a rancher, he has his cull sales. He sells his opens in the fall. So that's what the cull sales is, where he opens in his old ones. And then his custom hire income is when he goes and helps neighbors brand and different things like that. And then other income is when he's like breaking horses and he does little odd jobs around. So we included that in here. So his total ranching related income is totaled right here. And then we look at this, and if you remember from his little summary, in year 3, he's paying more operating expenses. He's paying all of the operating expenses himself. So his father is making him pay for some of the cake that they bring in. He's paying for his trucking, and he's paying land rent to his dad and different things like that. But for these first few years, his expenses are smaller because he's getting some of that for free with that labor trade with his father. So then we come down here, and his total expenses, this is his total operating expenses for these first few years. And then we include his off-farm income expenses. Off-farm, he also works at the sale barn in town. This guy is very, very busy. And then he's got his living expenses and other payments. And if you can see here, his total expenses are more than his total income. So we need to make sure we're leaving enough room so that he can pay to live a good quality life too. So we bring it here for the cash flow, and again, the on-farm income, the off-farm income, we're looking at the expenses that he's paying and his loan payments. So this one's a little bit different because if you remember, we're loaning him operating capital. So his payments he's got his cattle note payment to us, and that's this $13,500 here. And then we include operating interest on this page too. So his total expenses, because we don't want to just put operating note and interest here in this line, because then his operating expenses would be counted twice. So we break it out a little bit. So then his cash on hand, here's his cash on hand after all his bills is paid, after all the operating, after all the things. And then we've got his off-farm expenses, what it costs him to live. He's got to, he's got to pay his cell phone bill. He's got to pay his pickup note, and all of that. So his ending cash on hand is here. And if you remember from his goals, he wants to start 100% cash operating. That's a goal of his. And then he also wants to buy some more supplies and stuff himself. So he wants to own more panels. He wants to, maybe buy a four-wheeler, all of those different things. So he has a higher ending cash on hand to be able to make sure that we can do that. And his is also a little bit different. For cattle ranchers, we have this really cool thing called a growth chart. And I guess I'm going to pause there because we'll get more into that later because that talks more about the goals. So we'll come back to that. So that was a quick overview on the cash flow and what that looks like. So moving on to the key ratios. So it's like, okay, we've got all these numbers. What do we do with them now, right? So there's different ratios like us at a lender that we look at and that you as a producer should know about. And we're going to talk about them here. So the first one I want to talk about is the debt to asset ratio. So this is figuring out how much equity you have in your operation. So here's just an example that we pulled that we made up. And anything below 1 is good, because if your total debts was 90,000 and your total assets were 90,000, that means that you technically don't own anything in your operation. And we want to see you gaining equity in your operation. It helps you with access to capital and different things like that from traditional lenders. So anything below 1 is good, but the closer to 0, the better. That means you're not overextending yourself, and I have a positive net worth. And this was automatically calculated on some of the financial sheets that we put together. The next one I want to talk about is your debt service capacity, and this is your ability to pay all of your bills. So you take your total income divided by your total payments, and this is your ability to pay all of your ranch-related debts. Anything above 1 is good, but the higher the better. So in this example, this person is making $125,000 a year, and the expenses on that is $85,000. So their debt service capacity is 1.47, and that's above 1. It's good. It means that they can pay all of their bills. If this was exactly 1, that means that there is no wiggle room. We cannot be wrong about any expenses. We have no room for an extra breakdown or anything like that. So that the healthier it is, the higher the number will be. And then this one is rancher specific, but it's kind of like your break even point. And it's like, okay, like what do I need to get at the sale barn to be able to pay and to come out ahead this year? So you take all of your expenses, like your operating costs and all of your debt payments, and then divide it by the number of calves you're projecting to sell. And this kind of comes into hand with goal planning too, if you want to like retain heifers and different things like that. So this person has $110,000 in notes that they have to pay, and they want to sell 150 calves. So at the sale barn, their average needs to be $733.33 to break even to pay all of their bills. Anything above that is extra income, and that's good. But this way they know like what their break even point is at the sale barn. And then we talk about your profit margin, and this is for your value added operations. So it shows you how much wiggle room you have with what things cost and what you're selling them for. And so for example, this person made $60,000 in income that year, but the cost of goods sold and everything cost them 35% or $35,000. So you subtract those two and then divide by 60,000. And so they have a 41.67% profit margin, which is good. That means that they have the extra income to pay the bills. They've got a little bit of wiggle room. If this is 0, that means you're not making any money on what you're doing. And so that's not good. So you want it high, but you also don't want to gouge your customers. So it's just kind of something to know and watch. And then so I am going to get out of here and show you a couple examples. All right, so this is the rancher one. And let's go over here to the ratios overview page. Here's that debt service capacity and that on-farm debt to asset ratio that we were talking about. Here's just a quick summary that we do, like your bills being paid with your calf check. so that you know what you're getting with your CAF check. And if you'll see, this is a lot lower than what it was on his overall cash flow. And the reason is because this is just his CAF check. It does not take into consideration his call income, and it does not take into consideration like his off-farm job, or his when he helps his neighbors or breaks horses or things like that. But this is what he's paying with his CAF check. And then we've got operating costs per calf sold, and then all on-farm per calf sold, and that's what we just calculated. This is his break-even point. One little bonus we like to throw in there is his operating costs per calf sold, because it's like a general rule of thumb. You want to keep this stuff below 400, because then anything above that you can use to pay like your operating notes and all of that stuff, your land mortgage, tractor payment, and that kind of stuff. But this is the critical one, his key one. That's his break-even point. That's what he needs to make at the sale barn to be able to pay all his bills. And then we come over here to the farmer one, and we talk about, or we got his profit margin. We've got that calculated here. And then bills being paid with his crop sales, since he doesn't have an Akiptan note yet, but we're projecting one in 2022 and 2023. Here's what we come out to there. But this profit margin is the important one, along with the debt service capacity. So this is a very healthy debt service capacity. That means he can make his payment 2 3/4 times. So he definitely has, if something were to happen, if he has an extra breakdown or something like that, he definitely can pay the bill. And then his on-farm debt to asset ratio is also very, very good. It's very close to 0. And that means he owns a lot of his operation. So that's what that is. And then lastly, we will move on to the financial goal planning. And I think I missed the poll on the last one, but I'm pretty sure Dawn has a poll for this one. So I'll give a couple seconds for Dawn to do the poll for this one. And one of the things that we get a lot with our producers is, so they come in and they're just like, hey, I want to own cows. And they haven't really thought about goals beyond that, because owning cows is a really attainable goal, but goals beyond that, as far as like, do you want to get to a point where you are totally cash operating, you don't owe the bank any money? Or do you have 50 cows now, but you want to get to 175 without taking on any more debt? Do you want to buy more equipment? I mean, you just different things like that. Do you want to build a barn? And if so, like, how do you get there? And they like putting pen to paper with your goals. So it looks like we're split like 50-50 on this. So very good, very nice, very nice. So we're just going to talk about a little bit of the goal planning we do here at Akiptan, but each operation is unique, each one's different, so it varies, and we are very happy to accommodate where our producers are at. So the very, very first thing to do is to set smart, tangible goals. So you want to identify your goals with timelines. So it's like, in 10 years, I want to be totally debt-free, or I want to get to 175 cows without taking out any more debt to buy additional cows because I want home-raised ones. Or it's, I want to quit my off-farm job within 5 years. You want to be able to set a timeline to that so you have something to work towards. And then if there's step 2 is to kind of identify any costs or what has to shift to make it happen. So if you want to quit your off-farm job, you need to make more money on farm to support your living expenses. If you want to build a barn, and you're going to take a loan for that, you're going to have to make sure you have extra income to cover that loan payment, different things like that. Step 3 talks about comparing and integrating your goals. So once you've identified what has to shift, you need to go in and figure out like, okay, here's what it is. So I'm going to use the barn example again. If you're going to, you want to have enough extra income to pay the note to build a barn. So you're going to build a barn and it's going to cost you $40,000. And your annual payment on that we're projecting is going to be $10,000. So you're going to put in on your cash flow on your template, you're going to put in $10,000 as a debt expense and see if that cash flows. And if it doesn't, you might have to put that off a year to make it happen. And this is where you kind of get into step 4 and you take a step back and analyze, okay, like, is this working? Is this not working? Do I need to adjust my goals? Can I reach them faster than I thought I could? Or do I need to slow down and maybe put them off for a year so I can get this stuff taken care of first? And this is where you really analyze and reconfigure if needed. Step 5, follow through. That's doing the work and that's getting the results, right? And I know it takes time, but it's super exciting when those pay off. It helps to have a plan on paper to get you to those goals. So I am going to show an example for our Farmer Joe and Rancher Joe here. So just a quick reminder, Rancher Joe wants to grow his herd to around 175 cows. That's what his dad has room for. He wants to purchase additional equipment over time, so he needs some money left over, and he wants to cash operate and his cattle herd be debt free. That's his goal by the time the 12 years is over. So since there wasn't really quite a tool out there for ranchers, we created one at Akiptan here, and we kind of call it our growth chart. And so what we do, I'm going to zoom out so you can get a better picture. What we have here is a really comprehensive tool that helps you plan out your herd numbers over time. And I'll go to one of the individual pages. We do different assumptions like a 5% calf loss, 10% open rate, 1% cow deaths from crawling in a dam or something like that. We're very conservative on that side because we'd rather have extra income than less. And we put in, an average price and what he's making, and then for his opens. And so he wants to get to 175 head of cows very soon, as soon as he can. And since his expenses are mostly paid for him these first couple years, he is able to be really, really aggressive and keep all of his heifer calves so that he can grow his herd with his homegrown heifers without taking on additional debt, which is what is super ideal. He'll have to, as time goes on and he has more expenses, he'll have to sell a few, but he wants to retain as many as he can to hurry up and get to that 175. So we have him at 175 in 7-8 years without taking on additional debt. They're all home raised, and that's exactly what he wants. And after that, he'll only have to retain 15 to 20 a year to replace what he's losing with old cows and dries and different things like that. And of course, this isn't set in stone, and this is how it has to be. It's flexible and we can adjust it, but we needed to have put pen to paper to get him there, right? And so we have this put together, and it takes into consideration in year 3 where those operating expenses really grow up because his dad isn't helping him as much anymore, and his total profit and loss. So he has extra income at the end of the year, which he can use to cash operate. So he's borrowing less from us to get out of that cycle. And he can also use it to buy more equipment. He can buy his own vaccine guns. He can do all of those things. So we got a plan put together for him. And this is not a linear process. This is up, down, back, front, sideways, everything. And that's the really nice thing about having all of this in Excel, because we can punch in different numbers and see what it would look like. So in 2023, where he's having to sell 16 heifers and he's keeping 30, we can change this really easily to 20 and then see, like, what does that do to his cash flow and what does that look like? And I'm going to change that back because I did a lot of work to be able to reach his goals. But it's really nice, and that's why it's really great to have a relationship with your lender, because we are happy to do this for you. We need to sit down and figure out your goals, and we can figure out a plan to get there. So this is the plan that we put together for Rancher Joe. And like I said, it's not a linear process, and it's not a set in stone process because, as we all know, things are so unpredictable. But it's good to have your goals and your plans on paper, something tangible for you to look at and remind you, like, hey, if I want to reach these goals if I want to have 175 head by 2028, this is what I have to do, And then it's the same for the farmer one. As a reminder, they want to quit their part-time job off the farm, and they want to grow their value added line. So on their cash flow, we figured out we're going to have to plant an extra $1,000 worth of seeds and buy an extra $1,000 of seeds and plants to be able to create an extra $10,000 in income to be able to do less off farm work so that they can get slowly on their ranch. And like I said, with this one, we're really conservative and this isn't set in stone. If in 2022 we figure out that that greenhouse really increases their abundance of products, this could be higher and they might have to do less off-farm work. It just depends, but we wanted to have a plan in place. And so we sat down, we ran the numbers and all the things to figure out how to get them there, right? And what does that look like? And you know, we're projecting this, but what does it look like for the profit margin? Because making more money means spending more money, and what does that look like? And still having a fair product price for the clients and all the things. So, and we want to make sure that, you know, their debt service capacity is still there. And so putting pen to paper for those goals is really great. And I cannot emphasize this enough. It is not a linear process. There's a lot of back and forth and up and down and trying different numbers and seeing what this looks like and that looks like and what can we do here and what can't we do, and if we can't do it this year, can we do it next year? And it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of collaborating, but in the end you'll have a solid plan for healthy financials and for a healthy operation. So with that, we're ending the webinar here today. Here's all of our contact information. We also have a really great newsletter where you can sign up and not miss any of these webinars or miss any of our announcements. We just announced the increased loan limits, and we'll be doing a more formal announcement of the land mortgage product and down payment assistance product here soon, but that way you don't miss any of that stuff. So with that being said, I haven't been watching the chat box. Dawn, is there any questions?
We don't have any questions, but
Thanks,
folks are more than, it was so good, Skya. But yeah, folks are definitely welcome to call us, email us. I put your email in the chat, Skya. So if anyone present has any afterthoughts, you know, just send us an email, give us a call.
Perfect. Well, I am glad to hear it. And yes, I cannot stress that enough. Please give us a call. We are here to help. We love getting to do this stuff. And yeah, just reach out. Don't be shy. Give us a call. Send us an email, whatever you got to do. Stop by if you're in the area. But we're also very familiar with working with our producers who aren't in the area. And that's a lot of phone calls and Zooms and all the things. So with that, everybody have a great day. And I look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.